So this time of year, we read from the book of Maccabees, and I'm always fascinated by the book of Maccabees myself, the two books, and I think that from this reading in particular, I think maybe it makes me reflective, and maybe all of us as Catholics reflect on what we would do in the face of, of persecution. What would we do? Would we be faithful in that time of persecution, or when we were forced to do something, and when facing maybe even death? How faithful would we be? We just cross our fingers maybe if we said, and our history is filled with that. Reading about the Tudors and Henry VIII and how Thomas More, had to, said he wanted to stand his ground and not take the oath of fidelity as the king, as King Henry VIII being the leader of the church, but obviously, and people were coming up to him and saying, just take it. We all took it. Right? We don't mean it when we say it, but it's either, think of the good you could do if you still did that. And I remember, maybe also called to mind, that when I was in seminary, we had Chinese students, and we had two different Chinese students, and one from a religious community that was studying with us, and he was from the underground Catholic Church. And then we had the patriotic seminarian from the patriotic Catholic Church, and they were both studying in the same seminary. And I remember talking to Father Joe, well, he's not Father Joe, but it was a seminarian, Joseph was his name, and he was from the underground church, from the Society of St. Joseph, I think it is. And, he kind of resented the fact that he was in the same seminary with those who sold their soul, so to speak, because he and all of his friends suffered tremendously, that's the word, tremendously, to be part of the underground church and faithful to Rome, as opposed to, you think they sold their souls. And then, of course, in the patriotic church, and getting to know them, because obviously they're in the same seminary, for them it was a matter of, think of the good I could do. Look, I don't believe that. I certainly believe in Rome in my heart, but I could do a lot of good out in the world. And so I think we probably always come to that solution, to that dilemma. How much do we sort of give in and say, well, think of the good we could do if we have a relationship with the political people, or do we stand our ground? And it's a challenge I think we all have, because we live in this world and interact with the secular world while trying to continue to be faithful to God. And you could see that in the second book of Maccabees, Eleazar is dealing with that. And as an old man, he's like, I'm not going to give in, because someone comes up to him and says, look, you're being asked to eat meat sacrificed, that's unlawful to eat. And why don't you just bring your own meat and eat that and pretend to eat the meat? That'll satisfy them and you can save your life. And Eleazar says, absolutely not. I'm not going to give a bad example to the young people too, in my old age, after being faithful for so long. Right? He says, I'm not going to therefore kind of present to the young people. He says, I want to leave to the young people a noble example of how to die willingly and generously for the revered and holy laws, for their faith. And I think our faith is filled with people who said, no, I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to fall away or pretend or cross my fingers and yet still try to interact and deal with that. But with the book of Maccabees, you have these and other examples, if you get a chance to read that we read of people who stood firm and said, I'm going to give an example of someone who does not. What I really like about it is, like, he says, but Eleazar made up his mind in a noble manner, worthy of his years and dignity of his advanced age, and merited distinction with his gray hair, and the admirable life that he had lived from childhood. Right? That he would be loyal to the holy laws given by God. That in his old age, he was not going to compromise and leave a bad example. And he says, should I thus pretend for the sake of a brief moment of life? They would be led astray by me, these young people, for the sake. So may that be our challenge too, to be good examples and witnesses to our children, to our the people in our faith, the young people in our parish, especially as we grow old, at what it means to be faithful to the end, to persevere to the end, and be careful whenever we want to sort of pretend or cross our fingers or kind of just compromise a little in order to get along, but then sacrificing who we really are and what it is we do believe.